Hey guys, welcome back. So we made it through the first week. I know it was a bit of a rough transition, and hopefully from here on, deadlines and things will be more clear. And again, thank you to those of you that did email me and let me know that the material that you needed wasn't available to you. And if that ever happens again in the future, please, please, please let me know so that I can address it accordingly. Today we're going to be talking about things to keep in mind while you're working on your A3. And then we'll do some review and go over some of the requirements for these annotated bibliographies you'll be turning in. But first, let's talk about some important dates that you should keep in mind. So, April 6th is when your final draft of your annotated bibliographies are going to be due. So, I have decided to make this all of the bibliographies due on Sunday. So that is April 6th by 11:59 p.m. You'll turn in annotations 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is 2 peer review scholarly sources and 2 popular media sources. And then on the week of April 5th, you're going to start to sign up for conference slots on Canvas. I will post a link and make that available to you so that you can just put your name in a box on a Google Doc where you just will sign up for a 10-minute slot. And you'll be meeting with me. It'll be a web conference. We'll probably use Zoom, and we're just going to talk about what your plans are for A3 and discuss any areas that maybe you have questions about or you need help with, or maybe some suggestions that I have for you. And then on 4/28, we'll be doing online peer review workshop. So by 4/27 at 11:59 p.m., you'll need to turn in your first draft of A3 so that we can do the workshop on the 28th, and then A3 will be due on April 30th. So keep all of these dates in mind, jot them down if you're in your planners, if that's how you keep track of things, or your phone calendars, whatever it is, and I will do my best to remind you guys of these deadlines as they're approaching. So let's talk about things that you might want to keep in mind when writing an argument research paper. So if we think about all the words that come to mind when you hear the word argument, they usually have negative connotations for most people. And if we look at the way that these are defined in the dictionary, an argument is defined as a discussion in which a disagreement is expressed or as a debate. So then if we look up the definition of debate, it means to engage in an argument by expressing opposing points. And if we look at the other term that is posed here, which is dispute, that is defined as to argue about or to debate. And then if you look at the definition of a quarrel, it's an angry dispute. So we see that there's a lot of overlap between all of these different terms. So I just wanted to pose the question of how these things are different, how they're similar, and where might you draw the distinction to guide you in when you decide what it is that you're writing when writing a research argument. I think that the fine balance there is that you want it to be considerate of the opposing viewpoint, but you also want to argue for one side and back up your argument with claims and evidence that support those claims. So, when thinking about the other side, I just wanted to pose some questions because persuasion is a fine art, and so things you might think about as you're trying to persuade your stakeholder are how should you approach someone that has a different perspective from you? And why might dialogue between people from different value sets not be effective? I think most of us can say that we've seen arguments where people don't lead to any kind of conclusions or people get aggressive or defensive. So, how might you apply this information to your research for A3? How does that inform your research? And I think part of that comes down to considering the different sides of the issue. So, you want to think about what your research indicates about the different perspectives associated with this issue. So, for instance, if we're talking about oil, there are many different options and there are benefits associated with each. There are trucks that can transport them, there are railroads that transport them, there is pipelines, which seem to be the most obvious one. So think about the different perspectives from the people that would argue for any one of these forms of transporting oil, for instance. So when you do your research, remember to include sources that show the complexity of that issue and the different perspectives. So, not just the two most extreme sides, but something that shows that this issue is not just black and white, that it's very complex, that it's very layered, and that it is in shades of gray. So, this is a little bit of review for those of you that looked at the video posted last week, but talking about peer review and scholarly sources, since you'll be turning in your annotations for this pretty soon, um, they are they go through a specific and rigorous process in order to be published, and they're written by researchers for researchers, so you're not really their intended audience, and a lot of the information that they include can be really dense because it's written at a PhD level. So you may find yourself having to look up certain terms, and know that that's perfectly fine and normal, and I mean, you should expect it really, and that's why you should probably allocate more time for these. And if you click on the link here, you can find a video on the peer review process. If you guys went to the library session, you likely already watched this, but if you want a refresher on it, this does a really good job of detailing that for people. So again, just to review, popular sources are often written for a general audience. They use basic language that's easily understood, and they rarely list citations for their sources. Typically, are shorter and have pictures and colors. Here's some examples of what that would look like on the right. And then if you look at the academic sources and how they compare to popular sources, they're often written by and for faculty, researchers, and scholars. They use technical language and vocabulary that is discipline specific. So a psychology journal would have terms that are related to psychology that you may not be familiar with, for instance. And they will include full citations and long lists of citations for sources, which makes them also typically longer than 10 pages. They back up their claims with evidence from other experts in the field, and they're mostly text, and they will occasionally include charts and graphs, but few pictures that are in color. So here are some examples of what that looks like. Again, these are just some more examples of what a scholarly peer-reviewed source would look like. And then here is an example of what a popular source would look like. So there's a discussion post that you'll need to respond to for this week. It's titled Evaluating Sources for Credibility. And this is just getting you to think about the ways that a certain source may or may not be credible. So I will expect you to respond to that discussion post by Sunday, by 11:59 p.m. There are some articles posted on there. I want you to choose one of the articles, explore it, and sort of answer the questions that ask you to evaluate whether or not this source is reliable. Annotations and expectations or requirements for these annotated bibliographies. So you'll be doing that on a total of 4 sources that are representative of your research. 2 of them will be peer review and 2 of them will be popular media. They should all come from the library's database, and you should be analyzing the reliability, relevance, and recency of these sources. And your sources should present different perspectives on the issue that you're talking about and represent them fairly, regardless of what your position is. They should also help you identify stakeholders in this issue and help you understand the complexity of the issue. You should be able to identify your own position given the research that you've done, and it should prepare you to write your argument about that issue, ideally. And just a side note, I encourage you guys to have more than 4 sources. All of my students that end up doing really well on this typically have more than 4 sources because it is such a research-based paper. So we're going to look at a student example, and as we look at it, I want you guys to consider how the student frames the summary and what he talks about in that summary, and what kind of information is included in the analysis. So here is that sample annotated bibliography. This is what yours should look like when you turn it in. You can see that at the top we have that hanging indent with the full works cited citation as it would appear at the end of a works cited page. And then we have a summary for the first half. So the writer summarizes the thesis and key points of the article that they're talking about. And then below that, we have an analysis of it where the writer addresses the relevancy, recency, and reliability of this source. So make sure that you take a good look at that and see how it's working so that you can imitate it when you're turning in your own annotated bibliographies. And just a general reminder that MLA citation and formatting guidelines can be accessed on OWL and EasyBib. These are great resources for you. I highly encourage you to use them as you're working on this assignment. Other reminders, these should be 250 words for each annotated bibliography. Keep in mind that you're turning in 4, so each of those should be 250 words. And half should be dedicated to the summary and half should be dedicated to the analysis. And again, the analysis is going to cover the relevancy, reliability, and recency of the particular source that you're talking about. Homework for this week, you will complete your 4 annotated bibliographies. These are going to be based on your 2 peer review articles and your 2 popular media sources. And you'll upload all of these as a single Word document to Canvas by Sunday, which is April 6th by 11:59 p.m. And then I want you guys to respond to that discussion post by Sunday as well and continue to research your topic. You should, by the end of this, have a good idea of which sources you'll be using and how you will be supporting your points with those given sources. And as always, feel free to email me should any questions come up or any material not be available when it should be available, or if you want to have a one-on-one conference via Skype or Zoom or whatever it may be. Thank you guys for tuning in. I will catch you on Thursday.